During Larkhaven's coldest winter, a starving German shepherd waited beside a gas station while everyone drove past. Then 74-year-old Navy SEAL veteran Jonas Beckett found him buried in snow and barely alive. Jonas wrapped the puppy in his faded military coat and carried him home through the storm. Weeks later, the dog saved Jonas after he fell through the ice beside Blue Heron Creek. But the ice had broken because warm, polluted water was secretly flowing beneath the snow. Soon, Jonas and Mica uncovered a truth that could save the town, or tear it apart. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe for more powerful stories. Winter had made Larkhaven beautiful in the way a locked room could be beautiful. Snow smoothed the roofs, softened the fences, and covered the abandoned machinery outside the repair shops until every jagged thing looked harmless. On clear mornings, sunlight struck the valley so fiercely that people stepped outside shielding their eyes. The whole town appeared newly made. But beneath that whiteness, gutters had split from the weight of ice. Propane deliveries were late. The mountain road had closed 3 times in 10 days. Families measured coffee, firewood, and patience with equal care. At the northern edge of town, the red sign above Dugan Fuel burned through the snowfall like a single coal. The gas station sat where the plowed road narrowed toward the pass. It consisted of 2 fuel pumps, a low convenience store, and a weathered tool shed leaning slightly toward the tree line. Truckers stopped there before climbing into the mountains. Locals came for coffee, kerosene, and news they pretended not to care about. For 8 days, a German shepherd puppy had lived behind the shed. At night, the animal crawled beneath a gap in the wooden floor. An old heating pipe passed under the building, keeping a small patch of earth damp instead of frozen. The warmth was weak and smelled of dust, rust, and motor oil, but it was better than the open wind. During daylight, the puppy sat near the front wall and watched people enter the store. It had learned that some hands dropped food. A truck driver with a red beard tossed half a meat stick without leaving his cab. A woman in a white pickup left a piece of chicken on the curb and drove away before the puppy approached. Another man laughed when the little dog tried to chew a frozen crust of bread, then took a photograph through his windshield. Most drivers looked once and kept moving. The puppy never chased the vehicles. It simply watched the red taillights vanish into the snow, then lowered itself beside the wall again. Clive Dugan noticed everything that happened on his property, especially anything that might cost him money. At 58, Clive had the heavy shoulders and rounded posture of a man who had spent too many years lifting fuel cans and too many nights bending over bills. His thick gray mustache drooped lower on the left side where an old scar pulled at his lip. A chain of keys hung from his belt and announced his movements before he spoke. He had tolerated the puppy at first. Then a customer complained that a stray dog near the pumps was dangerous. Another said she would report the station if she saw it again. Clive imagined an inspection, a fine, 1 more letter from the bank, so he began driving the animal away. "Go on," he shouted, striking the frozen pavement with a broom handle. "Find somewhere else." The puppy would scramble behind the shed, wait until the keys stopped rattling, and return. It did not understand property lines, liability, or the fragile arithmetic of a failing business. It understood only that the pipe beneath the shed gave warmth, and that food sometimes appeared near the red sign. On the 6th afternoon, Clive came outside angrier than usual. His wife's prescription had doubled in price that morning. A fuel delivery was delayed. The card reader at Pump 2 had frozen again. He shoved an empty carton toward the puppy with the broom. The dog darted aside, but not quickly enough. The wooden handle glanced across its front leg. The puppy cried out. It was a small sound, sharp and surprised. Clive stopped. For a moment the broom hung uselessly in his hand. The puppy crouched near the wall, 1 paw raised, eyes fixed on him. Clive's face tightened. He opened his mouth, but whatever might have become an apology never reached the cold air. Instead, he turned, went back inside, and closed the door harder than necessary. The bell above it rang once, bright and accusing. Jonas Beckett saw the puppy for the first time the following morning. He was 74, though distance made him look both older and harder to place. He stood around 5'9", with broad shoulders bent slightly forward and a compact frame that had thickened rather than weakened with age. His short silver-white hair was naturally untidy beneath his wool cap. Deep lines crossed his forehead and gathered around his pale blue-gray eyes. Jonas pulled a lightweight collection cart behind him. The frame had been built from aluminum tubing, salvaged bicycle wheels, and 2 retractable runners for deep snow. A wooden trash hook rested along one side. People in Larkhaven knew the cart. Some called Jonas useful. Others called him stubborn. Brent Rusk, the snowplow driver, called him the admiral of discarded cans. Jonas called it work. He collected wire, bottles, broken straps, rusted tools, and anything else likely to end up in Blue Heron Creek after the thaw. He sold some metal to the recycling yard, but the money was secondary. He had worn a uniform for 22 years. When that life ended, he had needed another form of service that did not require anyone to salute. The puppy watched him from beside the wall. Jonas stopped 20 feet away. He did not whistle. He did not crouch or stretch out his hand. He set down a piece of dried beef, backed away, and continued along the road. The puppy did not touch it until he had nearly disappeared. The next day, the meat was gone. Jonas saw the dog several more times during breaks between storms. Sometimes it hid beneath the shed. Sometimes it sat beneath the red sign with snow collecting on its head. Once, Jonas noticed it flinch when Clive carried a broom outside. He still did not approach. Animals that had learned fear did not need enthusiasm. They needed predictability. On the 9th night, the temperature fell so quickly that windows cracked in 2 houses near the river. Wind drove powdered snow beneath doors and into the seams of parked cars. The county issued a warning asking residents to remain indoors until noon. By morning, the storm had passed. The sky over Larkhaven was a hard, polished blue. Snow lay deep and untouched beyond the plowed road. Every branch glittered. The world looked peaceful enough to forgive. Jonas left home after the warning expired. He wore his old olive field coat, the one with the faded U.S. veteran patch over the left chest, and a worn American flag sewn onto the sleeve. Beneath it were a gray sweater, dark work trousers, and winter boots with steel studs. The coat had survived salt water, rain, storage trunks, and 3 decades of Montana weather. Jonas had replaced the buttons twice, but never the frayed lining. When Dugan Fuel came into view, something felt wrong. The puppy was not waiting near the entrance. Jonas slowed. A shape rested against the side wall, half covered by drifted snow. At first it looked like a dark bundle of cloth. Then he saw the outline of one ear. Inside the store, Clive stood behind the counter, staring through the fog glass. He had not gone outside. Jonas left the cart beside the road. The snow reached halfway up his boots as he crossed the lot. His right knee protested with every step. The puppy did not lift its head. Clive opened the door a few inches. "I think it's dead," he called. Jonas kept walking. "Been there since I opened." Jonas stopped 6 feet from the animal. Snow covered its back, neck, and narrow skull. Only part of the muzzle remained visible. One front leg was folded beneath the body, while the other rested stiffly over the snow. Jonas crouched slowly. The puppy's eyes opened. They were dark brown, unfocused at first, then fixed on his face. It tried to rise. The effort lifted its chest only an inch before the legs trembled. Still, it forced itself upright into a crooked sitting position. One paw remained raised, the same paw Clive had struck days earlier. The puppy did not whimper. That silence disturbed Jonas more than crying would have. A cry asked for relief. This looked like an animal that had gone beyond expecting it. Jonas removed one glove and held his hand near the puppy's nose without touching it. The breath that reached his skin was faint and cold. "You stayed too long," he said. The puppy blinked. Jonas heard Clive behind him shift his weight. Keys rattled against his belt. "You taking it?" Clive asked. Jonas looked down at the small body, trying to remain upright. For years, he had believed that difficult decisions announced themselves with noise, alarms, orders, men shouting through wind and gunfire. But some decisions arrived quietly. They sat beneath red signs with snow on their backs and waited to see what kind of man had found them. Jonas stood and removed his coat. The cold immediately pressed through his sweater. He laid the coat open across his knees, then moved one hand beneath the puppy's chest and the other under its hips. The animal tensed but did not resist. It weighed almost nothing. Jonas had lifted equipment, wounded men, and bodies from places no one should have died. Yet the absence of weight in this living creature frightened him more than burden ever had. He wrapped the puppy in the olive coat. For a moment, the faded veteran patch disappeared beneath its chin. The little dog's eyes remained open, watching him from inside the worn fabric. Jonas carried it to the cart and arranged a canvas sack beneath the coat to soften the metal floor. Clive stood in the doorway. His heavy face had lost some of its color. Jonas did not accuse him. There was no need. The broom leaned against the glass behind him. Clive's mouth moved, stopped, and tightened beneath his mustache. Jonas took hold of the cart handles. "Road's bad past Miller's Bend," Clive said. "I know. You got heat at your place?" "Yes." Clive looked toward the bundle in the cart. Then he disappeared inside. Jonas waited only because his knee needed a moment before the road. Clive returned carrying a dented can of beef stew and a sealed bottle of water. He placed both near the back of the cart without meeting Jonas's eyes. "That's all I've got open," he said. Jonas nodded once. It was not forgiveness. It was not even an apology. But it was the first honest thing Clive had done that morning. Jonas began pulling the cart toward town. The road shone white beneath the winter sun. His sweater offered little protection, and the wind found every opening at his neck and wrists. Behind him, the cart wheels clicked softly over patches of ice. After several yards, Jonas stopped and looked back. The puppy's head had shifted beneath the coat. Its muzzle rested against the faded flag on the sleeve. One dark eye remained visible, still watching. "I'm not leaving you there," Jonas said. The words came out rougher than he intended. He faced the road again and continued walking. The old coat had once carried the smell of salt, smoke, and fear. Jonas had kept it because he did not know what else to do with the years sewn into its fabric. Now it held a fragile body against the cold. For the first time in a very long while, something from the war was not asking him to remember the dead. It was helping him carry the living. By the time Jonas reached the cabin, the cold had worked through his sweater and settled into his shoulders. He left the collection cart beneath the porch roof, lifted the puppy from the worn field coat, and carried it inside without stopping to remove his boots. Snow melted from his trousers and gathered in dark pools across the floorboards. The cabin was small but orderly. A stone hearth occupied one wall. Shelves held canned food, repair manuals, and jars of screws sorted by size. Near the window stood a narrow table made from salvaged pine. Nothing in the room existed only for decoration. Jonas laid the puppy on a folded towel several feet from the fire. He had seen hypothermia before. Too much heat, too fast, could push blood away from the heart and make a bad situation worse. Still, memory did not make the small body before him any less frightening. He removed the wet clumps of snow from its coat with slow fingers, then filled 2 glass bottles with warm water and wrapped them in dish towels. One went beside the puppy's chest. The other rested near its belly. The puppy's breathing came in shallow, uneven pulls. Jonas counted each one. At 12, there was a pause long enough to make him lean closer. At 13, the chest rose again. He reached for the telephone. Dana Wycliffe answered on the 4th ring. Her voice carried the calm impatience of someone who had spent 30 years receiving urgent calls from people who first tried everything except calling a veterinarian. Dana was 59, compact and strong-armed, with ash-brown hair cut below the ears and pale green eyes that rarely wasted movement. "What color are the gums?" she asked. "Pale? Any blue?" "No." "Is the body stiff?" "Cold, not rigid." "Good. Keep the heat gradual. Do not put him against the fire. Do not feed him yet." Jonas looked at the can of stew Clive had placed in the cart. "I wasn't planning to. You were considering it." Jonas said nothing. Dana exhaled softly. "Warm the chest and abdomen. Dry towels only. Check the breathing every few minutes. If he becomes less responsive, call me again. Brent is clearing Ridge Road at first light. I'll have him collect you. I can drive. You cannot drive through 3 feet of snow. I have chains, and I have treated you before." Jonas glanced at his right knee. Dana added, "That was not praise." The line went quiet except for a faint crackle. Then her voice softened. "Jonas, keep talking to him. He doesn't know me. That may be exactly why your voice matters." After the call, Jonas sat on the floor beside the towels. He did not know what to say. For years, speech inside the cabin had been functional. Weather reports from the radio, grocery lists spoken aloud so he would remember them, the occasional curse directed at a stripped screw. He placed one hand near the puppy's muzzle, but did not touch it. "You're in my house," he said. The puppy did not react. "There's a rule about dying in here." One ear twitched faintly. Jonas watched it. "I haven't decided what the rule is yet." The fire shifted behind him, sending a small spray of sparks against the screen. Hours passed in increments of breath. Jonas changed the towels as they cooled, refilled the bottles, and kept notes on the back of an old hardware receipt. Time, breathing rate, gum color, response to touch. Near midnight, the puppy opened its eyes. They were unfocused, dark and glassy, but they remained open long enough to find Jonas. The old man felt an unexpected pressure beneath his ribs. Not hope exactly. Hope was too ambitious. It was responsibility taking shape. He moved one bottle closer and continued counting. By dawn, the puppy's body had lost some of its terrible stiffness. Brent Rusk arrived before 7 in a county snowplow, horn sounding twice outside the cabin. Brent was 63, long-limbed and lean, with a rectangular face, pale eyes, and a white-gray beard trimmed with unnecessary precision. Snow dusted the shoulders of his cobalt work jacket. His protective goggles sat on his forehead, making him look like a mechanic who had accidentally wandered into an expedition. He stepped inside, saw Jonas on the floor, and glanced at the puppy. "You look worse than the dog," he said. "Good morning to you. That was my good morning." Brent crouched carefully. The puppy's eyes moved toward him, then closed. Dana said, "No heroic nonsense." Brent said, "I followed instructions." Dana said you'd say that too. Together, they carried the puppy outside in a wooden produce crate lined with towels. Jonas kept his field coat wrapped around the crate rather than wearing it. Brent looked at the coat, then at the temperature gauge on the truck. "You planning to freeze out of principle? I'm wearing a sweater. That sentence should be carved on your grave." The snowplow moved slowly down Ridge Road, its blade pushing aside the latest drift. Jonas sat with the crate on his lap, one hand resting beside the puppy rather than on it. Dana's clinic stood behind a feed store on the southern edge of town. A green sign swung above the entrance, half buried in frost. Inside, the room smelled of disinfectant, wool blankets, and animals that had no interest in being there. Dana met them wearing a gray-green veterinary coat over blue stone scrubs. A faint scar marked the underside of her chin. She always said an angry barn cat had given her a permanent reason to respect honest warnings. She examined the puppy without unnecessary conversation. Temperature, heart rate, lungs, abdomen, paws. Jonas stood beside the table, jaw tight. Dana noticed. "You can breathe," she said. "He is." The puppy was approximately 5 months old, badly dehydrated and underweight. The pads of his paws were cracked. The front right leg had a shallow bruise, but no fracture. There was also a narrow band of compressed fur around his neck. "He wore a collar recently," Dana said. Jonas studied the mark. "Microchip? None. Could have been removed? Possible. More likely he never had one." Dana prepared warmed fluids and explained each step before touching the puppy. She spoke his existence aloud as if the name he did not yet have could be replaced temporarily by gentleness. Jonas watched the puppy flinch when a metal tray clattered in the next room. The movement was immediate. Head down, shoulders tight, body trying to become smaller. Dana saw it too. "He's afraid of more than weather," she said. Jonas did not answer. By noon, the puppy had swallowed a small amount of softened food. Not willingly at first, but hunger eventually overcame caution. Dana instructed Jonas to report the animal to county control and post a found notice. There was a mandatory holding period before any adoption could become official. "He may belong to someone," she said. Jonas looked at the bruise on the front leg. "That does not always mean he should go back." "No," Dana replied. "But we follow the law before we follow our conclusions." The photograph was taken against a plain wall. The puppy looked smaller in the image than he did in person. All oversized paws and uncertain ears. County Control posted the notice that afternoon. A delivery driver later called to report that he had seen a dark vehicle stopped near Dugan Fuel during one of the storms. The driver remembered the rear door opening. He could not say whether the puppy had been pushed out, escaped, or had already been there. Snow had hidden the license plate. The call produced no answer, only another possibility. 3 days passed. No one claimed the puppy. Jonas brought him home with medication, feeding instructions, and a temporary foster form. The cabin changed immediately. Not visibly. The shelves remained in place. The table stayed clear. The firewood was stacked squarely beside the hearth, but every ordinary object became capable of causing fear. A saucepan slipped from Jonas's hand on the second evening. The clang against the floor sent the puppy beneath the table so quickly that Jonas barely saw him move. He remained there for almost an hour. Jonas placed food several feet away and sat in a chair with his back turned. The puppy did not eat. Jonas moved farther, still nothing. Finally, he carried his coffee to the window and watched the snow outside. Behind him came the faint sound of a metal bowl shifting across wood. He did not turn around. That became their arrangement. Food appeared. Jonas withdrew. The puppy decided whether the room was safe enough to live in. The broom was worse. The moment Jonas lifted it, The puppy flattened himself against the wall, eyes fixed on the handle. Jonas stopped. He set the broom down outside the cabin and did not bring it back in. The next afternoon, Ruth Ann Crowell arrived carrying a covered pot, a folded blanket, and an expression that made refusal impractical. Ruth Ann was 67, round-faced and bright-eyed, with silver blonde hair held by a leaf-shaped clip. She wore a teal cardigan beneath a navy coat, and the scent of cinnamon followed her through the doorway. "I brought soup," she said. "I have food. I brought better food." She placed the pot on the stove and noticed the puppy beneath the table. Ruth Ann did not approach. Instead, she removed a biscuit from one pocket of her green apron, placed it on the floor, and sat beside Jonas. The puppy watched her. "So," she said quietly, "this is the new commanding officer. He's temporary. Of course. There's a legal holding period." "Very sensible." Jonas looked at her. Ruth Ann's attention had shifted to the old field coat spread near the hearth. The faded veteran patch was visible beneath a folded towel. "That coat finally found respectable work," she said. "It was already useful." "Yes, but I imagine it spent a long time carrying things too heavy to see." Jonas's face tightened. Ruth Ann did not apologize or explain. She simply poured soup into 2 bowls. Later, after she left, Jonas found the biscuit gone. The puppy began spending less time beneath the table. He followed Jonas with his eyes, then with his head. Then, after several more days, with cautious steps, Jonas gave him a name on the 5th evening. A piece of split firewood caught the light and revealed thin, bright flakes in the stone beside the hearth. "Mica," Jonas said. The puppy looked up. Jonas repeated it. "Mica." One ear lifted, the name remained. That night, snow whispered against the windows, rather than striking them. Jonas sat beside the fire, repairing a leather glove. Mica lay several feet away, still unwilling to be touched without warning. The old field coat had been folded into a bed near Jonas's chair. For some time, Mica only stared at it. Then he rose. He approached the coat, smelled the sleeve, and placed one paw on the fabric. His body remained tense, ready to retreat. Jonas lowered the glove and became perfectly still. Mica stepped onto the coat and turned twice before lying down. After a moment, he shifted closer until his back rested against Jonas's boot. Jonas did not reach for him. He understood that affection could become another kind of pressure when offered too quickly. So he sat quietly while the fire burned lower and the cabin settled around them. There were 2 patterns of breathing in the room now, one slow and worn by years, the other small, uncertain, but growing steadier in the dark. The county adoption form contained 3 pages of questions and one line Jonas disliked. Reason for adoption. He sat at Dana Wycliffe's front desk with the pen suspended above the blank space. Behind the counter, an old terrier slept inside a laundry basket, snoring with the confidence of an animal that had never filled out government paperwork. Mica sat beneath Jonas's chair. The puppy was heavier now, though still too thin through the ribs. His right ear stood upright while the left leaned outward at the tip, as if refusing to commit to the same decision. The dark marking around his left eye gave him a permanently thoughtful expression. Dana finished stamping the medical record and looked across the counter. "You have been staring at that line for 2 minutes. It is poorly worded. It wants to know why you are keeping him." Jonas wrote 2 words. "Practical arrangement." Dana leaned over, read the answer, and slowly removed her glasses. "Most important decisions in a person's life," she said, "are disguised as practical arrangements. He needs a place, and you happen to have one. Yes, he needs consistency. I have a schedule. He needs companionship." Jonas looked down at Mica. The puppy was chewing gently on one of Jonas's bootlaces. "I have not seen evidence of that requirement." Dana smiled and returned the form. "Sign at the bottom." Jonas did. The name on the official record became Mica Beckett. He objected to the last name until Dana explained that county software required one. He muttered something about bureaucrats assigning family relationships through drop-down menus, but signed that line too. Outside the clinic, snow had stopped falling. Sunlight reflected from the plowed banks with painful brilliance. Mica hesitated at the top of the steps, then descended beside Jonas rather than waiting to be carried. It was a small movement. Jonas noticed anyway. Over the next week, he modified the collection cart. The project began with a wooden produce crate and became, through stubbornness, a roofed compartment with a padded floor, ventilation slots, and a hinged front panel. Jonas added a short safety tether so Mica could not jump into traffic, then removed it when he decided the clasp was poorly designed and rebuilt the entire attachment. Brent Rusk arrived during the third revision. He stood in the open workshop doorway holding his metal coffee flask, snow melting from his cobalt jacket. "That for the dog?" Brent asked. "Or are you finally admitting you need a carriage?" Jonas tightened a bolt. "The dog. Shame. You would look distinguished in there." Mica emerged from beneath the workbench carrying a leather glove. Brent pointed at him. "Supervisor says your workmanship is slow. He stole that. Management has privileges." Jonas held out his hand. Mica stopped several feet away, watching him drop. The puppy lowered the glove but kept one paw on it. "Negotiations," Brent observed. Jonas waited. Mica eventually stepped back. Jonas retrieved the glove and rewarded him with a small piece of dried meat. Brent took a drink from his flask. "You are becoming patient in your old age. I have always been patient. You once rebuilt my snowblower at midnight because you could not tolerate waiting until morning. It was making an irresponsible noise." Brent nodded solemnly. "A national emergency." The first outing lasted only 20 minutes. Mica rode inside the wooden compartment while Jonas pulled the cart along Ridge Road. The puppy's head remained visible beneath the little roof, eyes moving between snowbanks, passing trucks, and Jonas's back. At the first discarded aluminum can, Jonas stopped. Mica watched him use the wooden hook to lift it from the ditch. When the can landed in the cart with a metallic clatter, the puppy flinched and pressed himself against the rear panel. Jonas did not continue. He turned the can over in his hands, then placed it quietly into a cloth sack instead of dropping it into the metal bin. "Different sound," he said. Mica's body slowly relaxed. From then on, Jonas lined the collection compartments with old canvas. The work became less efficient. He accepted this without complaint. A few days later, Mica began walking beside the cart for short stretches. His gait was awkward, front paws landing with more enthusiasm than coordination. He frequently became distracted by snow buried over roadside weeds, the tracks of rabbits, and anything Brent had recently driven over. Jonas established rules: no pulling, no crossing ahead of the cart, no eating unidentified objects from ditches. Mica treated the third rule as an unreasonable philosophical position. Their route eventually took them past Dugan Fuel. The station's red sign hummed above the pale road. Mica slowed before they reached the pumps. Jonas felt the leash tighten. A fuel truck released its pressure brakes with a violent hiss. Mica dropped low, scrambling sideways until his shoulder struck Jonas's leg. Jonas planted his feet and lowered the handle of the cart. He did not tug the leash. Mica stared at the pumps. His breathing came quickly, and the tip of his left ear flattened. "We can go around," Jonas said. Clive stood behind the store window. The two men saw each other. Neither waved. Jonas guided Mica away from the pumps and around the edge of the lot, keeping the tool shed between the puppy and the machinery. Mica stayed close enough that his ribs brushed Jonas's boot. Near the shed sat a metal bowl filled with water. Steam rose faintly from the surface. Clive came out wearing his oil-stained olive work coat. His large key ring rattled against his hip. A short broom was tucked beneath one arm. Mica saw it. He backed into Jonas so abruptly that the old man nearly lost balance. Clive stopped. For once, he did not pretend not to understand. He lowered the broom to the ground and pushed it away with his boot. "The pipe freezes if I don't keep warm water back here," he said. Jonas looked at the bowl. "That so? Bad design. The bowl has paw prints painted on it." Clive's mustache shifted. "Was the cheapest one." Mica remained behind Jonas's leg. Clive looked down at him but did not move closer. "He doing all right?" "Better. Good." The word seemed to cost him something. Clive returned inside. He left the bowl where it was. Mica did not drink that day. On the next pass, he approached within 6 feet. A week later, he sniffed the rim after Clive had gone back into the store. Jonas never praised him for it. Trust was not a trick to be rewarded on command. The collection route began attracting people. At first, they stopped because of Mica. A mechanic named Owen Fitch came out of his garage to scratch the puppy's chest, then noticed Jonas trying to lift a rusted wheel rim from a snowbank. Owen was a thick-armed man in his 40s whose coveralls carried the smell of rubber and brake dust. "You planning to throw your back out before lunch?" he asked. I had a method. Looked like an obituary. Together, they lifted the rim into the cart. The following morning, Owen left a separate pile of recyclable metal beside the garage rather than tossing it into the waste bin. Ruthann placed 2 painted barrels behind her diner. One for cans, one for glass, and threatened to serve decaffeinated coffee to anyone who ignored the labels. Brent spread the threat through town with unnecessary enthusiasm. Soon Jonas found tied bags waiting at several stops. People began asking where the recovered material went, what could be reused, and why so much roadside waste ended up near the creek after the spring thaw. Jonas answered briefly. Mica did the social work. He greeted Ruth Ann with his entire body. He sat patiently for Owen. He tolerated Brent's harmonica for almost 11 seconds before leaving the room. People who would not have approached Jonas alone came to see the dog and stayed to discuss the work. The old man found this both useful and irritating. He had built the route around Solitude. Solitude did not ask personal questions. It did not bring coffee, offer opinions, or refer to his cart as a community initiative. One afternoon, a woman from the hardware store asked whether volunteers could accompany him on Saturdays. Jonas opened his mouth to refuse. Mica leaned against her knee while she scratched beneath his collar. Jonas looked at the dog. "One person at a time," he said. The woman smiled. "That sounds almost welcoming. It is a safety restriction." Of course, the change did not feel dramatic. Nothing in Jonas's life ever announced itself properly. It arrived as extra gloves left on the workshop shelf, a second coffee cup near the stove, names written beside collection stops. Mica, sleeping after a morning, spent meeting people who had once driven past the roadside without slowing. The circle around the cart widened by inches. Then, on a clear morning near the end of February, Jonas took the lower trail toward Blue Heron Creek. The sky was cloudless. Sunlight poured across the snowfields, turning every rise and hollow into hard blue shadow. The creek wound below the road beneath shelves of ice. Jonas worked slowly along the bank, collecting food wrappers and lengths of plastic cord exposed by the wind. Mica moved nearby on a long lead, nose buried in the snow. Halfway around a bend, the puppy stopped. Ahead, a section of the creek remained open. Dark water moved between white banks, giving off a faint mist. Other exposed patches existed where currents ran fast, but this one lay in a broad, slow bend that should have been sealed beneath ice. Mica approached the edge. He lowered his head, sniffed, then sneezed sharply. Jonas looked up. "Mica!" The puppy stepped onto a patch of gray foam trapped against the bank. He jerked backward and began licking his front paw. Jonas crossed the distance quickly, his right knee protesting on the slope. He caught the lead, lifted Mica's paw, and smelled something faint but unpleasant. Not rot, not fuel exactly. Something metallic and sweet beneath the cold air. Jonas opened the clean water bottle he carried and rinsed the paw thoroughly. Mica tried to pull away but settled when Jonas supported the leg without gripping it. "You were told not to investigate unidentified substances," Jonas said. Mica stared at him. "That rule applies to management too." Only after the paw was clean did Jonas study the creek. Several small fish lay motionless beneath the thin ice at the edge. A film clung to the water near the reeds. Farther downstream, strips of cloudy industrial plastic had tangled around a fallen branch. Jonas used the hook to pull one strip free. A printed logo remained visible beneath dirt and ice. Northlake Materials. The factory stood several miles upstream beyond the tree line. It produced insulation panels and treated composite material, employing a large portion of Larkhaven. Jonas placed the strip in a separate sack. He did not immediately decide what it meant. That restraint was harder than lifting any wheel rim. By noon, he had called the county office and been directed to Talia Monroe. She arrived before sunset in a dark navy field jacket, charcoal trousers, and waterproof boots. Her black hair, threaded with a few silver strands, was tied low at the back of her neck. A narrow strand had escaped near her right temple. She carried a faded military green equipment bag that Jonas noticed without commenting on. Talia examined the open water, photographed the foam, and measured several points along the bank. Jonas handed her the labeled plastic strip. "Northlake," he said. "I can read. The creek is warm. A portion of it is open. Those fish are dead, likely. I need to determine how recently." Mica sat beside Jonas, watching Talia unpack glass containers and disposable gloves. "You think this is normal?" Jonas asked. "I think conclusions made before sampling are vulnerable conclusions. There's a discharge somewhere. There may be. There may also be groundwater movement, road runoff, dumped waste, or material carried here by wind." Jonas's jaw tightened. Talia noticed. "You called because you wanted someone qualified to examine it. I called because the water is wrong. And I came because wrong is where an investigation begins, not where it ends. For several seconds, only the creek moved between them. Mica looked from Jonas to Talia, then sat directly in the space separating their boots. Talia glanced down. Is he mediating? He dislikes unnecessary noise. That makes two of us. Jonas almost smiled. Almost. Talia took preliminary samples from the open bend and a second location upstream. She labeled each bottle, recorded the time, and sealed them inside a chilled case. These are screening samples, she said. They can tell us whether further testing is justified. They are not evidence for a public accusation. Jonas looked toward the dark water. How long? A few days. And if something is there, then we follow it properly. Jonas disliked the word properly when it meant waiting, but he looked at Mica's cleaned paw, at the foam pressed against the reeds, and at the woman who had come into the cold rather than dismissing his call from an office. No accusations, he said. Talia closed the sample case. No dismissals. They shook hands once briefly. Mica stood between them, tail moving in a slow, uncertain sweep. The agreement was narrow, cautious, and built on mutual irritation. It was also the first thing they had constructed together. The screening results arrived 2 days after Talia collected the samples. She called Jonas just after sunrise. The water near the bend is warmer than the upstream control, she said, and the lab found traces of compounds that should not be present there. Jonas stood beside the kitchen table, looking at Mica asleep near the stove. How bad? Bad enough to request formal sampling. Not enough to make a legal accusation. So something is being discharged. It means something requires investigation. Jonas rubbed the stiff knuckles of his left hand. Talia had a talent for placing careful language between herself and any conclusion he wanted to reach quickly. Under other circumstances, he might have admired it. What happens now? I submit the report to the State Environmental Office. They assign a field team. We preserve the site and wait. How long? I don't know. Jonas looked through the window. Fresh snow had covered the road and every object along it, turning yesterday's tracks into an erased argument. Evidence doesn't wait, he said. Neither does water, Talia replied. Which is why I need you to stay out of that section until we have proper equipment. I know how to walk beside a creek. That is not what I said. Before Jonas could answer, the line went quiet. Talia had ended the call. Mica lifted his head. Jonas looked at him. She lacks conversational discipline. Mica thumped his tail once against the floor. The irritation stayed with Jonas through breakfast. He had spent much of his life around people who mistook caution for authority and procedure for progress. Yet Talia had not dismissed him. She had tested the water, documented the site, and done exactly what she promised. That made disobeying her more difficult. It did not make it impossible. For 3 days, Jonas kept to the roads above town. He collected broken tire chains, aluminum cans, and a torn blue tarp caught in a fence. Mica rode in the cart more than usual because the irritation on his front paw had not fully healed. Dana had prescribed a mild wash and ordered limited exposure to salted roads. Limited, Jonas had repeated. Not your interpretation of limited, she had said. By the 4th morning the weather cleared. The storm had passed during the night, leaving a pale sky and deep powder. The county road crews were still working the main routes. No new snow was expected until evening, when warmer air from the west would bring wind and possibly rain. Jonas saw the forecast and thought of the refuse sack near Blue Heron Creek. He had noticed it during his last visit, snagged high in the branches of a fallen willow near the bend. If rain arrived before it was removed, the water would rise and carry the contents downstream. It was not inside the marked sampling area. Not exactly. Jonas told himself he would remain on the upper bank. He left Mica at home. The puppy had spent the morning licking the treated paw and staring at the door. Jonas secured the latch, checked it twice, and placed a piece of dried meat inside a rubber toy. "You are off duty," he said. Mica watched him through the front window as the collection cart disappeared down the road. The trail beside Blue Heron Creek had changed under the new snow. Its edges were no longer visible. The bank and the frozen surface seemed to merge into one broad white slope. Jonas used his wooden hook as a probe, pressing it ahead of each step. The sack remained tangled in the willow. From above he could see dark material inside, plastic wrap, food packaging, perhaps cloth. He set the cart brake and lowered the runners before moving toward it. The creek sounded different beneath the ice, not louder, hollow. Jonas paused. He pressed the hook into the snow ahead. The surface held. Another step. The hook sank through 6 inches and struck firm ice below. He moved sideways toward the branch. The sack was heavier than expected. He hooked the tied end and pulled once. It shifted only a few inches. "Of course," Jonas muttered. He braced his right boot and leaned back. The branch released suddenly. The cart moved behind him. A wheel slipped sideways beneath the snow, dragging the frame toward the bank. The brake caught for half a second, then the edge beneath it collapsed. The cart jerked hard against Jonas's hand. He turned instinctively, trying to stop it. The ground disappeared. Jonas fell through a crust of snow and ice into black water. The cold did not feel cold at first. It felt like impact. His shoulder struck stone beneath the surface. Pain flashed down his right arm. Water closed over his chest, filled the space under his sweater, and pulled the breath from him before he could shout. His boots found nothing solid. Jonas reached for the edge. The ice broke beneath his hand. He tried again, driving his forearm across a wider section. The surface cracked in a widening circle. His right knee refused to push with full strength. The old joint moved, but not enough. The shoulder would not lift properly. For several seconds, training took over. Control the breathing, reduce movement, find the current. The water beneath him was moving toward the open bend. Not fast, but steadily enough to drag his legs away from the bank. He turned his body sideways and caught a root protruding from the frozen soil. The root bent but held. Jonas looked up the slope. The cart lay on its side, one runner hanging over the broken edge. His pack rested beyond it. The whistle attached to his coat had twisted behind his shoulder. He tried to reach it. Pain stopped him. The creek continued pressing against his legs. Back at the cabin, Mica had abandoned the rubber toy. The old door latch had always required a lift before it settled completely. Jonas knew this. He had planned to repair it twice. Mica rose onto his hind legs and struck the handle with both front paws. The latch jumped. The door opened 3 inches. Cold air entered the cabin. Mica pushed through. He found Jonas's trail easily across the fresh snow. By the time the puppy reached the creek, Jonas's grip had weakened. Mica appeared above the bank so suddenly that Jonas first thought the dark shape was a branch shifting in the wind. Then the puppy barked. The sound was sharp, repeated, frantic. Mica! The dog ran along the edge, searching for a way down. He slid several feet, recovered, and lunged toward Jonas's right sleeve. His teeth caught the fabric. Jonas felt a brief pull. Back! Mica pulled again. The sleeve tightened against Jonas's shoulder, sending pain through his chest. No! The puppy released the cloth and barked directly into his face. Jonas could see the confusion in him. Mica understood that Jonas was trapped. He did not understand why all his strength changed nothing. Jonas looked toward the trail. He needed the dog away from the creek, needed him somewhere useful. With his left hand, Jonas tugged off one glove and threw it onto the upper bank. Mica! The puppy's head turned. Go home. It was a command they had practiced only in short distances. From the workshop to the porch, from Ruth Ann's back steps to the cart, always with a reward waiting at the end. This time, Mica did not move. Jonas tightened his grip on the root. Go home, Mica whined. Go! The word came out harder than Jonas intended. Mica backed away. For 1 second, Jonas thought the puppy would remain. Then Mica seized the glove and ran. Jonas watched him disappear over the bank. The silence afterward felt larger than the cold. He told himself the decision was correct. He told himself Mica knew the route. He told himself there would be someone on the road. None of those thoughts changed the fact that he was alone in the water because he had chosen to come alone. A low engine sounded beyond the trees. Brent Rusk had been clearing the service road near the lower trail. His snowplow moved slowly. Blade angled to push fresh powder from the drainage lane. Mica burst from the trees carrying Jonas's glove. Brent saw him and eased off the throttle. The puppy ran toward the cab, barking, then turned and sprinted back toward the trail. Brent lowered the window. Mica? The dog returned, jumped against the side step, and caught Brent's insulated trouser leg with his teeth. Easy. Mica released him, ran toward the trees, then came back again. Brent looked past the puppy. He saw the collection cart tilted near the creek. The driver's door opened before the plow had fully stopped. Brent grabbed the emergency rope and radio from behind the seat. County Dispatch, this is Rusk on Lower Heron Trail. Possible water rescue. Send medical and fire. He followed Mica down the slope. Jonas heard Brent before he saw him. Beckett, here. Brent reached the broken bank and dropped flat on the snow. You know, he called, securing the rope around a pine trunk. Most men your age collect stamps. Not helpful. It's helping me. Brent crawled forward and through the loop. Jonas missed it the first time. His fingers no longer closed properly. Brent pulled the rope back, shortened the throw, and tried again. The loop landed across Jonas's chest. "Get it under your left arm." Jonas moved slowly. The root creaked beneath his hand. Mica remained several yards back, circling and barking whenever he tried to approach the edge. Brent wrapped the rope around his own waist and pulled until Jonas's upper body rested against the ice. The surface cracked again. "Don't climb," Brent said. "Just stay flat." The first rescue crew arrived minutes later, though to Jonas the weight seemed separate from time. 2 firefighters spread a ladder across the weak surface and brought him up inch by inch. When they finally rolled him onto solid snow, Mica broke free of Brent's grip and pressed against Jonas's side. Jonas could not feel the puppy's warmth through his wet clothes, but he felt the weight. That was enough. He woke several hours later in Dana's clinic because the nearest emergency department had been delayed by road conditions. A county paramedic had reduced the shoulder dislocation and treated the hypothermia before leaving him under observation. Mica lay beneath the examination table. The puppy's head rested on Jonas's right boot. Brent sat near the window drinking from his metal flask. "You look terrible," Brent said. Jonas swallowed. His throat hurt. "You used that line already. It has remained accurate." Dana entered carrying a folded blanket. Her expression suggested that anger and relief had reached an agreement. "You left an injured puppy alone," she said. "He was safer at home. He escaped. I noticed. You went to an unstable creek bank alone. I stayed above the marked zone. You fell below it." Brent coughed into his coffee. Jonas looked at Mica. The puppy had mud frozen along one leg and a shallow scrape across his chest. Nothing serious. Evidence enough of how hard he had tried. "I told him to go home," Jonas said. "He did better than that," Brent replied. Jonas wanted to be angry. At the broken latch, at the cart, at the warm current under the ice, at himself. Instead, he looked away from Mica because gratitude felt too close to fear. Talia arrived near dusk. She carried a folder beneath one arm and still wore her navy field jacket. Snow had melted into the loose strand of hair near her temple. "I inspected the collapse site," she said. Jonas shifted carefully against the pillows. "There is a concealed outlet beneath the rock reinforcement. The flow appears intermittent." She opened the folder. The water near the outlet is between 3 and 4 degrees Celsius warmer than the upstream control. It rises and falls on a pattern. "A discharge schedule." "A pattern," Talia corrected. "The outlet was registered years ago for clean, non-contact cooling water. It remains listed as an emergency line, but not for process water." "No?" Jonas pushed the blanket aside. "I need my coat." Dana blocked the end of the table. "No." Talia closed the folder. "You are not returning to the site. You just found the pipe. I found an outlet. The state team will trace it. By the time they arrive, someone could flush the system or alter the line. And what would you do? Crawl through it with one functioning arm? I can document the route. You can recover." Jonas's voice hardened. "Waiting makes evidence disappear." Talia stepped closer. "A man who nearly died while handling one bag of garbage does not get to call safety procedures cowardice." The room went still. Brent lowered his flask. Jonas stared at her. Talia did not look away. "You do not know anything about cowardice," he said. "No," she replied. "But I know what it looks like when a man is more comfortable risking his life than asking someone to stand beside him." Mica rose from beneath the table. He moved slowly to Jonas and rested his head against the old man's left knee. Jonas looked down. The puppy had not pulled him from the water. He had not performed some impossible act of strength. He had done something Jonas had spent years refusing to do. He had gone for help. The understanding was simple enough to be humiliating. Jonas placed his hand on Mica's neck, not gripping, just resting there. "What does your team need?" he asked. Talia's posture eased, though only slightly. "Site observations, dates, photographs, your route records, and your agreement not to return alone." Jonas remained silent for a moment. Then he nodded. "No solo visits. Say it clearly." Brent smiled into his flask. Jonas gave him a warning look before turning back to Talia. "I will work under the team plan. I will not return to the creek alone." Talia held out her hand. This time their handshake was not cautious. It was a contract. Outside, evening settled over Larkhaven. The snow reflected the last light, while, beneath the sealed surface of Blue Heron Creek, warmer water continued moving through the dark. Inside the clinic, Jonas sat with Mica pressed against his knee and understood that survival had not come from enduring alone. It had come running back with his glove in its teeth. The official sampling team arrived in Larkhaven beneath a sky the color of brushed steel. There were 4 of them from the State Environmental Office and an accredited laboratory in Helena. They wore insulated coveralls, carried hard-sided cases, and spoke in the careful shorthand of people trained to assume that every measurement might someday be challenged in court. Talia met them at Blue Heron Creek before sunrise. Jonas stood farther up the bank with Mica beside him, both of them outside the marked work area. His right arm was still supported by a sling, though Dana had allowed him to remove it for short periods. The shoulder ached whenever he forgot himself and moved too quickly. One technician photographed the sampling bottles before opening their sealed packaging. Another recorded the coordinates, air temperature, water temperature, wind direction, and depth of snow. Samples were taken near the concealed outlet, above it, below it, and from an unaffected branch of the creek. Each container was labeled, sealed, signed, and placed inside a locked cooler. Jonas watched the entire process. "You look disappointed," Talia said. "I expected more water. This is enough water to ruin several people's month." She pointed toward a small gray instrument mounted beneath a protective cover near the bank. A data logger would record temperature and conductivity at fixed intervals for several days. A second device upstream would provide a control. "We are not waiting for one suspicious moment anymore," Talia said. "We are looking for a pattern." Jonas glanced toward the distant ridge where the North Lake Materials plant stood beyond the trees. Patterns belonged to someone. Eventually. The results took less than a week. The creek changed at night. Shortly after the end of certain production shifts, the temperature near the outlet rose. Conductivity increased with it, then slowly fell before morning. The cycle did not occur every night, but often enough that coincidence became difficult to defend. The accredited laboratory confirmed elevated levels of solvents and processing compounds inconsistent with ordinary road runoff or natural groundwater. Talia submitted the findings to the state. North Lake Materials issued a statement the following afternoon. The company denied discharging untreated process water. Its records showed that the treatment system remained operational and that industrial sludge had been transported to a licensed disposal facility according to schedule. By evening, copies of the statement sat beside cash registers, circulated through phones, and were read aloud over coffee at Ruth Ann's diner. Larkhaven began choosing sides before most people understood what the sides were. Some residents demanded the plant be shut down immediately. Others asked whether those people planned to pay the mortgages of the workers who would lose their income. A man at the hardware store said clean water meant nothing if half the town had to leave. A woman whose well drew from the lower basin asked how many jobs a poisoned water supply was worth. Neither question had a simple answer. That was what made them useful weapons. Jonas heard fragments of the arguments wherever he went. Conversations lowered when he entered and resumed after he passed. The collection cart, once merely eccentric, had become connected in people's minds to the investigation. Mica did not notice the shift. He greeted workers leaving the plant with the same hopeful attention he gave Ruth Ann and Brent. Some stopped to stroke his chest. Others walked past too quickly, eyes fixed on the snow. One man removed his glove, reached halfway toward Mica, then withdrew his hand as if kindness itself might be interpreted as a political position. Jonas saw the shame on his face. He did not call after him. Marla Penn called a private meeting at the municipal office 3 days later. The council chairwoman wore a midnight blue coat over a pale gray sweater, her silver and brown hair cut in a clean line at her jaw. A small green scarf rested at her throat. She spoke without raising her voice, which forced everyone else to lower theirs. Around the table sat Talia, 2 state officials, a union representative, 3 local business owners, and Jonas. Marla placed a blue fountain pen on the folder before her. "If the water is contaminated," she said, "we protect the water." The union representative folded his arms. "And if the plant shuts down, we protect the workers. With what money? That is the question we solve. It is not an excuse to ignore the first one." A state official began explaining enforcement options. Marla stopped him before he reached the end of the first paragraph. "I am not interested in a plan where the company keeps its assets, the executives hire attorneys, and the workers carry the punishment." The room quieted. Jonas studied her. Marla was not defending Northlake. She was refusing the easier story in which exposing wrongdoing automatically repaired everything around it. After the meeting, Talia walked with Jonas down the municipal steps. "You agreed with her," she said. "I did not speak. You stopped tapping your thumb against the railing." Jonas looked at his left hand. "I was unaware that had become evidence. Everything becomes evidence eventually." That evening, someone knocked on Jonas's cabin door after dark. Mica reached it first but did not bark. He stood several feet back, ears forward, body tense. Jonas opened the door to find Eamon Price on the porch. Eamon was 51, though exhaustion made him look older. He had a narrow face, deep shadows beneath hazel eyes, and dark hair streaked with silver where it had been crushed beneath a hard hat for years. His shoulders curved forward slightly, the posture of a man accustomed to working beneath pipes and inside machinery. He wore a dark teal industrial coat with reflective strips. One hand remained in his pocket, the other turned a worn wedding ring around his finger. "I need to talk," he said. Jonas stepped aside. Eamon entered but did not remove his coat. Mica approached, stopped, and sat near the wall. Eamon looked at the dog. "He doesn't trust me. He is considering it. I know the feeling." Jonas waited. Men who came to confess often needed silence more than questions. Eamon took a small notebook from inside his coat. It was wrapped in a clear plastic bag. "The primary treatment pump failed during the first hard freeze," he said. "Not completely. Enough that pressure kept dropping." "When?" "December 19th. Jonas remembered the date. The first storm had closed the pass that night. Eamon opened the notebook. "The plant manager approved a temporary bypass, 48 hours. Cooling line only," they said. "Diluted flow while repairs were made." "Who approved it?" "Malcolm Voss." The name carried weight in Larkhaven. Malcolm was Northlake's regional director, polished, articulate, and skilled at presenting company interests as civic responsibility. Eamon continued. "Celeste Naylor signed the operational change. She believed it would end after the repair crew arrived." "Did it?" Eamon looked at the floor. "The replacement pump was delayed. Then production was behind. Then there was another storm." He turned the ring again. The bypass stayed open. A small sound came from the stove as a log settled in the fire. Jonas did not move. "How long?" "On and off for weeks. And the monitoring system?" Eamon swallowed. "Some sensor alarms were disabled during specific shifts." "By you?" "No. But I saw the gaps." "You reported them?" Eamon's face tightened. "I asked my supervisor. He said the system was being recalibrated." "And you believed him?" "No." The word entered the room quietly. Mica rose and crossed the space between them. He sat near Eamon's boot, not touching him. Eamon stared down. "My wife's insurance is through Northlake," he said. "She has a heart condition. If I lose the job, we lose the coverage before we can replace it." Jonas understood then that fear did not always arrive looking like cowardice. Sometimes it wore a wedding ring. Sometimes it carried a prescription schedule in its pocket. "I copied parts of the maintenance log," Eamon said. "Dates, alarm codes, manual resets. Not everything. Why bring it now?" Eamon's eyes moved toward Mica. "Because I kept telling myself I was waiting until I knew enough." His voice thinned. "Then the creek nearly killed you." Jonas looked at the notebook but did not take it immediately. "You understand this may place you under investigation too." "I know. You may lose the job anyway." "I know." Mica rested his chin lightly against Eamon's knee. The man closed his eyes. For several seconds, his hand stopped turning the ring. That was the moment Jonas understood Eamon had not come seeking absolution. He had come because carrying the truth alone had finally become heavier than whatever followed after speaking it. Jonas took the notebook. "Talia needs to see this." Eamon nodded. "And you will tell her yourself." Fear returned to Eamon's face. Jonas did not soften the requirement. The truth cannot remain useful only when someone else delivers it. Eamon looked down at Mica once more. "All right," he whispered. 2 nights later, Clive arrived. He did not knock so much as strike the door twice with his knuckles and immediately regret the force. His olive work coat was zipped to the neck. Snow clung to the gray mustache above his tense mouth. He carried a small external hard drive. "My cameras overwrite every 30 days, he said. "I copied this before they did." Jonas let him in. Talia and Eamon were already seated at the table. Eamon stiffened when he recognized Clive, but Clive ignored him and placed the drive beside Talia's files. "What is on it?" she asked. "Fuel station footage. Nights mostly. Tanker trucks. Northlake trucks. Contractor logo. Grayson haulage." Clive rubbed both palms against his coat. "They bought fuel at hours that never made sense. Came from the plant road, headed south, then came back too soon. How soon? Sometimes under 2 hours. The licensed disposal facility listed in North Lake's records was nearly 3 hours away in clear weather. Talia connected the drive to her laptop. The footage alone proved little. Trucks traveled for many reasons. A timestamp could establish presence, not cargo or destination, but combined with fuel receipts, gate records, highway cameras, and data from the county way station, it could reveal whether the trips described in the company's paperwork were physically possible. Clive remained standing while Talia reviewed the first clip. On screen, a tanker rolled beneath the red station sign at 1:17 in the morning. Snow obscured part of the logo, but not all of it. "You noticed this before the investigation?" Talia asked. Clive's jaw moved beneath his mustache. "I noticed trucks. You kept receipts. I keep everything. But you did not report it." "No, why?" Clive looked toward the floor. "Because people come through my door every day carrying things I don't want to know." His keys shifted softly at his belt. "I got good at looking out the window and deciding whatever happened beyond the glass belonged to someone else." Mica stood near the hearth. Clive saw him. The dog did not retreat behind Jonas this time, but his body remained cautious. Clive slowly lowered himself into a crouch. His knees cracked loudly enough that Brent would have considered it a medical announcement. He placed a small piece of dried beef on the floor. Then he backed away. Mica watched him. No one spoke. The room held Eamon's fear, Clive's shame, Talia's evidence, and Jonas's growing awareness that wrongdoing was rarely protected by one monstrous person. It survived because many ordinary people found reasons to delay one difficult sentence. Mica approached the food. He smelled it but did not eat. Then he sat down between the treat and Clive. Clive's face tightened. The dog had not forgiven him, but neither had he fled. Talia removed the hard drive and sealed it inside an evidence bag. "This does not prove illegal disposal," she said, "but it gives us routes, times, and vehicles to compare." Clive nodded. "That enough?" "It is enough to continue." Eamon looked toward him. "For now," he said. The two men held each other's gaze. One had known what happened inside the plant. The other had watched pieces of it pass beneath a red sign. Neither was innocent. Neither was beyond use. Outside, snow began falling again, quiet against the cabin windows. Inside, the first shape of the truth emerged, not as a single revelation, but as separate fragments carried in by people who had finally grown tired of pretending they had seen nothing. The confirmation arrived without ceremony. No sirens sounded. No one ran into the street. Talia simply entered the municipal conference room, carrying a thick folder, and placed it before Marla Penn. The final analysis showed that partially treated process water had been diverted through the old cooling line. Maintenance records, temperature data, altered sensor logs, transportation records, and internal communications all pointed in the same direction. Malcolm Voss had authorized continued production after the treatment system failed. Celeste Naylor had signed reports stating that the bypass had ended when it had not. Grayson Haulage had billed North Lake materials for disposal trips that never reached the licensed facility. The truth was no longer a collection of suspicions. It had dates, signatures, volumes, and names. Jonas sat near the far end of the table with Mica beneath his chair. His shoulder had improved enough that the sling was gone, though stiffness remained whenever the weather changed. Eamon sat 2 seats away, turning his wedding ring until Marla placed one hand flat on the table. "Stop doing that," she said. Eamon looked down at his hand. "I'm sorry. You have apologized enough to the furniture." Talia opened the folder. "The state has issued an emergency compliance order. North Lake must suspend the affected production line, preserve all records, and begin a controlled shutdown." The union representative frowned. "Why controlled?" "Because the chemicals already inside the system cannot simply be abandoned," Talia said. "Some compounds thicken in extreme cold. Pressure can build inside transfer lines. If pumps stop in the wrong sequence, the containment tanks may overflow." Jonas leaned forward. "So the plant that polluted the creek is now too dangerous to turn off." Talia met his eyes. "It is dangerous to turn off badly." There was a difference, and everyone in the room understood that the difference mattered. The shutdown was scheduled to begin the following morning. North Lake's public statement blamed procedural failures at the regional level. Malcolm Voss was placed on administrative leave. Celeste Naylor retained an attorney. State investigators took custody of company servers, while workers were ordered to remain available for interviews. But the plant itself still hummed above Larkhaven. Steam rose from the stacks. Trucks remained lined near the loading bays. Men and women who had spent years entering those gates continued reporting for duty, now uncertain whether the next shift would be their last. Winter gave them no time to absorb it. The storm arrived before dawn. Wind drove snow sideways across the valley, erasing the road almost as quickly as Brent's plow cleared it. By 6 o'clock, power lines had gone down near the industrial ridge. The plant's emergency generator started automatically. At 6:19, a secondary circulation pump failed. At 6:27, Eamon called Talia. At 6:35, the county activated emergency response. Jonas received Marla's call while fastening Mica's collar. "I need you at the lower command post," she said. "Not inside the plant. I understand the distinction. I am emphasizing it because you have a history. People in this town are becoming disrespectful. Good. It may keep you alive." The command post was established in the parking lot of an equipment warehouse half a mile below Northlake. Visibility had fallen to less than 100 yards. Emergency lights flashed against sheets of snow, turning the white air red, blue, then white again. Jonas arrived in his olive field coat with the faded veteran patch darkened by wet snow. Mica rode in Brent's cab, separated from the active zone and secured behind the passenger seat. Brent lowered the plow window. Management requested transportation. Mica looked past him, ears forward. "You brought him here? To the safe point. Ruthann is taking him inside." Across the parking lot, Ruthann stood beneath the warehouse awning wearing a navy coat over her green apron. She had converted the building's break room into a warming station. Coffee, soup, blankets, and folding chairs appeared with the efficiency of a military supply chain no one had officially organized. Adult relatives of plant workers waited there beside off-duty employees. Some whispered. Others stared at their phones. Ruthann moved among them, placing cups into hands before anyone thought to ask. Mica hesitated when Jonas handed over the leash. "I will be outside," Jonas said. The puppy looked toward the flashing lights. Ruthann bent slightly but did not pull him. "Come on, Deputy Supervisor. Your department has sandwiches." Mica allowed himself to be led inside. Jonas joined Talia beside a folding operations table weighted down with sandbags. A plant map had been taped beneath a sheet of clear plastic. Eamon stood with 3 members of the technical team. His teal work coat was crusted with snow. The fear Jonas had seen in the cabin was still present, but it no longer controlled his hands. "The auxiliary pump lost power after the generator transfer," Eamon said. "Pressure is building in the eastern treatment loop. Can you isolate it?" Talia asked. "We can redirect part of the flow to the reserve tank, but the manual valve is inside Building 4. Hazard level, respirators required. No active leak yet." Jonas studied the map. The access road to Building 4 curved around a loading area exposed to the wind. 2 fire engines were positioned too close together near the lower gate, while an ambulance blocked the only clear route out. "You need a one-way vehicle pattern," he said. A county fire captain glanced at him. Jonas pointed. "Enter from the west gate. Exit south past the storage yard. Keep this lane open for medical transport. Move the ambulance behind the warehouse until it is needed." The captain studied the map, then nodded. Jonas did not touch the technical plan. He did not ask what pressure the lines could withstand, or which valve Eamon intended to close. Those questions belonged to people trained to answer them. Instead, he moved through the command area, helping crews navigate the whiteout, checking vehicle spacing and directing arriving workers toward the correct assembly points. Brent opened the western access road with the plow. Clive arrived 30 minutes later, towing a portable generator behind his pickup. His mustache was white with snow, and his key ring rattled beneath his coat. "Fuel station unit," he said. "Runs the freezer and half the building when power goes." A utilities technician inspected the connections. "We can use it for the temporary transfer pump." Clive looked toward the plant. "Then use it." No one asked what would happen to the frozen food at Dugan Fuel. The generator was moved into position. Inside Building 4, Eamon and the technical crew entered in protective equipment. They closed one valve, opened another, and began shifting pressure away from the damaged loop. Talia monitored water levels and containment readings from the command post. Every few minutes, she marked a number on the map with a grease pencil. Jonas moved between the access road and the warehouse. The work had no central heroism. It consisted of radios, checklists, ropes, fuel lines, frightened workers counting names, and dozens of decisions too small to be remembered if they succeeded. That, Jonas realized, was what competence often looked like. Not glory, coordination. At 8:12, a supervisor reported one maintenance worker missing from the Eastern Assembly Group. The name came through the radio, broken by static. Jonas heard only the words unaccounted for and Building 4. His body reacted before thought formed. He turned toward the gate. A fire captain was already calling for a search team, but the wind swallowed half the message. Jonas could see the outline of the building beyond the blowing snow. One person inside. A failing system. Time narrowing. He took 3 steps. Then something caught the back of his coat. Mica had slipped out when Ruth Ann opened the warehouse door to receive another group of workers. He stood behind Jonas with the faded hem of the field coat held gently between his teeth. Jonas looked down. Mica released the fabric and moved in front of him, not barking, not panicked, simply blocking the path. "Inside," Jonas said. Mica did not move. Talia came from the operations table holding a radio. "The search team is checking. They may need another person. They need accurate information. I know that building layout. You know the exterior map." Jonas looked past her toward the plant. The old instinct rose with painful familiarity. The belief that action was always more honorable than waiting, that entering danger proved commitment, that if someone might be lost, he had no right to remain outside. Mica pressed against his knee. Talia lifted the radio. "Wait for confirmation." Jonas's hands tightened. Every part of him resisted the stillness. Then a voice broke through the static. "Command. Missing worker located." He reported to the south staging area after assisting with generator transfer. "Repeat. Worker located and safe." The pressure inside Jonas released so suddenly that he felt unsteady. No one had needed him to run into Building 4. No one had needed rescuing. His impulse had not come from new information. It had come from an old wound searching for the same battlefield. Jonas rested a hand on Mica's neck. "You were supposed to stay inside." Mica looked up at him. Talia lowered the radio. "He appears to have difficulty with procedure." Jonas glanced at her. "So I have been told." For the first time that morning, Talia smiled. By late morning, Eamon's team had stabilized the eastern loop. Pressure dropped into the safe range. The reserve tank held. No chemicals reached the creek. When Eamon emerged from Building 4, his protective hood was streaked with frost. He removed his respirator and sat down heavily on the bumper of a utility truck. Jonas brought him water. "You did the work," Jonas said. Eamon drank, then shook his head. "We all did." Jonas looked across the command post. Brent was clearing an exit lane. Clive stood beside the temporary generator, arguing with a technician about fuel consumption. Ruth Ann was distributing soup to workers who had spent hours outside. Talia continued recording measurements, even though the immediate danger had passed. Eamon was right. The crisis had been controlled because each person had remained within the limits of what they knew and done that part well. No one had saved the plant alone. That evening, the town hall filled beyond capacity. Workers stood along the back wall. Business owners occupied the side aisles. Residents from the lower basin held copies of water reports. Several people wore North Lake jackets. Others carried signs demanding immediate closure. Marla Penn waited until the room settled. She explained the emergency order, the partial shutdown, and the ongoing criminal and regulatory investigations. When shouting began, she did not raise her voice. "Everyone in this room is afraid of losing something," she said. "Fear does not grant permission to poison water. It also does not permit us to discard workers as if they signed the false reports." The room quieted unevenly. Jonas had not planned to speak. Then Marla called his name. He walked to the front without notes. Mica remained beside Ruth Ann near the wall. Jonas looked at the workers first, then at the residents whose wells depended on Blue Heron Creek. "We keep being told there are 2 sides," he said. "Jobs on one bank, clean water on the other." He paused. "That is a useful story for anyone who does not want to pay for the damage." A murmur moved through the room. The company made the decisions. The company should fund the repairs. Workers should not lose their homes because executives chose delay over maintenance. The creek should not carry the cost because payroll matters. He looked toward Marla. "Require public discharge data, independent monitoring, full restoration. Keep wages moving during the controlled shutdown." A man near the rear called. "With what money?" Jonas answered without anger. "The money that was saved by not fixing the system when it failed." Marla then presented the framework she had been negotiating: an emergency corporate bond, business interruption insurance, state labor assistance, and a temporary county bridge loan. Northlake would be required to maintain most worker pay while the affected line remained offline. It was not complete. It would not protect everyone from every loss, but it refused the easiest cruelty. By the end of the meeting, the council approved the emergency package and independent monitoring plan. State investigators retained control of the altered records. Northlake's affected production line would remain shut down until the treatment system passed inspection. Outside, snow fell gently now. Jonas walked home with Mica beside him, rather than riding with Brent. The storm had eased, and the road reflected the streetlights in long amber bands. At the cabin, Jonas moved his coat and sat on the floor near the hearth. Mica settled beside him. For years, Jonas had believed usefulness meant placing himself between danger and everyone else. That day had taught him something harder. Sometimes usefulness meant stepping aside for the engineer, trusting the technician, listening to the councilwoman, letting the plow driver open the road, and allowing a dog to stop him from entering a building where he was not needed. He had not saved Larkhaven by standing in front of it. He had only helped the town stand together. Mica rested his head across Jonas's leg. Outside, Blue Heron Creek continued moving beneath the winter dark. For the first time since the investigation began, no contaminated water entered it that night. Spring came to Larkhaven reluctantly. For weeks, winter loosened its grip only to tighten it again overnight. Snow withdrew from the southern slopes, then returned in thin white sheets. Roofs began dripping at noon and froze solid by dusk. The roads softened into mud while the fields beyond them remained bright with old ice. Blue Heron Creek emerged by degrees. First came the sound, water moving beneath snowbanks. Then came the color, gray mud, black stones, dead grass pressed flat along the banks, and scraps of plastic twisted around exposed roots. The creek had not become clean merely because the truth was public. Jonas understood that before most people did. During the first inspection walk of March, he stood above the bend where the old outlet had been sealed. The water moved freely now, but a pale residue remained on several rocks below the former discharge point. Mica approached the edge, then stopped. At 9 months old, he had grown into his legs without fully learning what to do with them. His body was longer and stronger, but sudden turns still made his hindquarters arrive a fraction later than the rest of him. His right ear stood straight. The left remained slightly angled outward at the tip. Jonas watched him lower his head toward the water. "Not yet," he said. Mica looked back. Jonas pointed to the safer path. The young dog obeyed, though reluctantly. A year earlier, Jonas might have viewed the caution as failure. Now he understood that returning carefully was different from refusing to return at all. Northlake Materials spent the early spring rebuilding its treatment system under state supervision. The regional management team was replaced. Continuous discharge monitors were installed and connected to a public website anyone in Larkhaven could view. Independent inspectors were given access to the facility, and the company was ordered to fund restoration along the affected portion of Blue Heron Creek. Malcolm Voss faced criminal investigation for falsifying records and knowingly authorizing continued discharge. Celeste Naylor entered into a cooperation agreement, while civil claims were prepared against several parties, including Grayson Hollidge. The legal process moved slowly. People who had expected immediate punishment grew frustrated. People who had feared the plant would disappear entirely remained suspicious of every new announcement. Jonas tried not to confuse patience with passivity. It was a distinction he was still learning. Eamon Price was suspended during the internal and state investigations. For nearly 3 months, he did not enter the Northlake property except for interviews. He worked temporary repair jobs around town, fixing pumps, snowblowers, and one bakery oven that Ruth Ann insisted was more important than municipal infrastructure. When the review ended, Eamon was allowed to return as a senior technician. The decision was not presented as a reward. His delay in reporting the bypass remained part of the official record. He accepted that. At the first Blue Heron Watch meeting, Eamon sat in the back of the room instead of at the table. His shoulders still curved forward, and his fingers found his wedding ring whenever anyone mentioned the altered alarms. Jonas took the chair beside him. "You can sit at the table," he said. "I'm listening. That is permitted at tables." Eamon looked toward the front, where Talia arranged water testing kits. "I'm not sure everyone wants me there." Jonas considered the faces around the room. Some workers trusted Eamon, some residents did not. Both reactions were understandable. "Then sit there without asking them to forget," Jonas said. Eamon was quiet for a moment, then he moved to the table. The Blue Heron Watch program began with 12 people and too much paperwork. Talia designed a sampling schedule for approved locations along the creek. Volunteers learned how to use temperature probes, conductivity meters, and labeled collection bottles. Every reading required a date, time, weather note, and second signature. Jonas found the administrative process irritating. Talia found his handwriting hostile. Marla Penn found both complaints irrelevant. The oversight committee included plant workers, local business owners, landowners from the lower basin, environmental specialists, and 2 residents selected by public application. Marla chaired the first meetings, then deliberately stepped back once the procedures were established. "The point of oversight," she said, "is that it should not collapse when one person leaves the room." Jonas heard the lesson inside the sentence. He did not mention it. Ruth Ann's Diner became the unofficial headquarters. Sampling maps shared wall space with handwritten soup specials. Volunteers signed up for creek inspections beside a chalkboard warning that anyone who returned equipment muddy would be assigned dish duty. Brent took responsibility for winter access routes. He created a schedule for plowing the pull-off points near the creek and attached a note beneath Jonas's name, former Navy SEAL, current owner of 174-year-old knee, not exempt from safety rules. Jonas removed the note. Brent replaced it with a laminated copy. Mica spent meetings beneath the table, moving from person to person as if conducting his own form of oversight. He still avoided sudden metallic noises, but he no longer fled the room when a folding chair scraped the floor. Instead, he looked first toward Jonas, checked the old man's reaction, and decided whether the danger was real. The change was small enough that most people missed it. Jonas did not. Clive Dugan changed more slowly. Behind the gas station, he repaired the weathered tool shed where Mica had once hidden beneath the floor. He sealed the gaps, added insulation, installed a safe electric heater, and built 2 temporary kennels behind a separate fence. Dana Wycliffe inspected the work before allowing the county animal control number to be posted. "This is not a shelter," she told him. "I know. You cannot keep strays overnight without authorization. I know. You call us immediately. I know." Dana looked around the clean enclosure. "You could sound less offended when agreeing." "I could." He did not. The small holding space was intended only for animals found along the pass during storms. They could remain warm for a few hours until county personnel or Dana arrived. Clive refused to place his name on the sign. He also refused to call it anything other than the back room. Whenever Jonas and Mica passed the station, a bowl of fresh water waited behind the shed. For weeks, Mica drank only after Clive went inside. One afternoon in late April, Clive remained seated on an overturned crate several yards away. He placed a piece of dried meat beside his boot, then rested both hands on his knees. Mica approached slowly. His body stayed low, eyes fixed on Clive's hands. Jonas stood near the collection cart and said nothing. Mica smelled the food. He did not take it. Instead, he stepped close enough for his shoulder to brush Clive's fingers. Clive froze. The contact lasted less than a second. Mica moved away, circled once, and returned to Jonas. Clive looked down at his hand. "That count?" he asked. "No," Jonas said. Clive's mustache lowered. Jonas added, "But it is a beginning." By early summer, willow cuttings had been prepared for the damaged banks. The restoration team did not describe them as trees. They were slender branches, almost bare, each one cut to a measured length. Planted correctly in moist soil, they would take root, stabilize the bank, and eventually create shade for fish and insects. The work was slow. Plastic had to be removed from roots without tearing away the soil. Dead vegetation was documented before disposal. Several sections required erosion fabric and temporary fencing. Jonas coordinated volunteer routes but no longer worked each section himself. At first he hovered. He corrected the angle of tools, rearranged gloves, and repeated instructions already printed on the supply bins. Then one morning he arrived to find Owen Fitch and 2 plant workers repairing the collection cart without him. The right runner had developed a crack. Owen had removed it. Brent had brought a replacement strip, and Eamon was reinforcing the joint. Jonas stopped in the workshop doorway. "You took it apart. It was broken," Owen said. "You could have told me." "We did." "When?" "Yesterday." Jonas remembered the message on his answering machine. He had assumed it was a request for advice. Mica slipped past him and lay down beside the cart. Iman tightened the final bolt. Jonas looked at the three men working around the machine he had built alone and maintained alone for years. His first impulse was to inspect everything. His second was to ask whether they needed coffee. The second impulse surprised him. "How many?" he asked. Brent looked up. "Coffees? Yes, 4. There are 3 of you. I'm planning ahead." Jonas went inside. He did not inspect the repair until after they had finished drinking. In August, the state proposed naming a regional cleanup campaign after Jonas. The letter described him as the citizen whose vigilance had protected an entire watershed. Jonas read it twice, then carried it to Marla's office. No. Marla continued signing another document. No to the funding, no to the name. You understand they are offering substantial support. Then they can support the creek. Marla capped her fountain pen. What do you want it called? Blue Heron Watch. That already exists. Then they do not need another name. Marla studied him. Months earlier, Jonas would have refused both the recognition and the role that came with it. Now he agreed to coordinate winter safety workshops, collection routes, and volunteer training. He did not disappear. He simply refused to let the work become a monument to one man. Autumn passed quickly. By the first week of December, Mica was nearly 17 months old. His chest had broadened, the black saddle along his back had deepened, and the wheat-gold fur along his legs had grown thick against the cold. The tip of his left ear still leaned outward, preserving something of the uncertain puppy beneath the red sign. He no longer panicked when cans shifted in the lined collection cart. He still disliked brooms. Jonas considered that reasonable. Some nights the old dreams returned. Salt water, radio static, a hand slipping from his grip. Jonas would wake before dawn, breathing hard in the dark. Mica never climbed onto the bed. He lay outside the bedroom doorway, close enough to be seen, far enough not to trap either of them. Jonas would listen to the dog's breathing until his own slowed. Neither pretended the past was gone. They had simply learned how to remain in the same house with it. The first restored section of Blue Heron Creek reopened on a bright winter morning. There was no stage, no ribbon. Volunteers gathered along the bank, carrying willow cuttings, mallets, and buckets. Plant workers stood beside shop owners. Talia checked the planting depth while Eamon recorded locations on a waterproof map. Dana spoke with Clive near a crate used to transport an injured hawk to rehabilitation earlier that morning. Ruth Ann distributed coffee. Brent criticized the angle of everyone's shovels without being asked. Jonas stood above the water with Mica beside him. The creek was clearer than it had been in February. Not perfect, not healed, but moving. Talia handed Jonas a willow cutting. "You want the first one?" "No." "Why not?" He looked along the bank. "Put it where it is needed." So she did. People spread out and began planting. There was no dramatic cheer when the work ended. Only muddy gloves, tired backs, and rows of thin branches standing along the water like promises too young to offer shade. Jonas preferred it that way. A river did not recover because people applauded beside it. It recovered because they returned when no one was watching. Weeks later, the first true snow of the new winter began to fall. Jonas fastened the repaired olive-field coat over his gray sweater. The faded U.S. veteran patch remained over his chest, and Ruth Ann had stitched a new lining beneath the sleeve Mica, once gripped outside Northlake. The collection cart waited by the road. Its repaired runner shone brighter than the old frame. Mica trotted ahead, then stopped near the trail to Blue Heron Creek. Snow gathered along his back. He looked over one shoulder at Jonas. The old man adjusted his glove and continued toward him. "I'm coming," Jonas said. Mica waited. Ahead, the creek ran beneath new ice, clearer than it had been the year before. Willow branches stood along the bank, thin but rooted. Jonas rested one hand briefly on Mica's head. "This time," he said, "no one goes alone." They moved on together, not as heroes returning to admire what they had saved, as two living creatures who had learned that healing was not a moment. It was a place one chose to keep returning to. Sometimes the greatest danger is not created by one cruel decision, but by many quiet moments when good people choose not to speak. Jonas and Mica remind us that doing what is right does not always require strength, recognition, or perfect courage. Sometimes it begins with noticing what others have learned to ignore and refusing to walk past it. In our own lives, may we have the wisdom to recognize the small choices that protect another life, a community, or the world entrusted to us. Share in the comments what this story meant to you, and subscribe for more stories about courage, loyalty, and second chances. May God give you a clear heart, a steady voice, and the peace to know when it is time to stand.